Shalom. Uh, it's Gav. Hi. So it's late at night, Motzei Shabbat, and I've got another comment on a thread here. It's 3 or 4 paragraphs long. There's not much to be said for the brevity of this comment, so I'm going to kind of paraphrase here. Basically, if you reject the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you don't want peace. You're some kind of extremist. Okay, so I'm assuming everybody knows what the two-state solution is if you're watching this video. Something you're probably familiar with. Or not, in which case is going to be really boring and confusing. My apologies. Why do I reject the two-state solution in its current iteration? Why do I put myself in the same category of people, many of whom are in fact extremists, who reject the two-state solution? I mean, let's be honest. Hamas rejects the two-state solution. The PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, rejects the two-state solution. Fatah, the PLO, while paying lip service and occasionally engaging in negotiations, also rejects a two-state solution. If we're being honest, we should probably call them on that. For the other side, Ichud Lumi, the National Religious Party, of which I used to be a voter, rejects a two-state solution. Habayit HaYehudi, the Jewish Home Party, rejects a two-state solution. There are many others. Could go on and on with the list of people that reject it, but it seems to be almost like an accepted tenet of religion that all reasonable people accept the two-state solution, in which basically we would withdraw from Yehuda v'Shamron, like we withdrew from Gaza in 2005, and we would turn over control of these territories to a future Palestinian state. We shake on it, we sign, deal, done, everybody lives happily ever after, there's peace. That's the theory. I mean, that's you'll have people who are staunchly pro-Israel, and they'll say, well, it has to be this way. It absolutely has to be this way. Otherwise, you have a choice between a democracy and a democracy in the sense that we'll have to allow everyone to vote, we'll have to annex the territories, and we'll have to do this and we'll have to do that, or we can have a state that's still a Jewish democracy or whatever. It's very interesting that the formula upon which the two-state solution is based on is called Land for Peace, in which we would give people land and they would agree to be peaceful with us. Sounds like a nice concept, but there's kind of a flaw built into it. You have the land, I've given you the land, you can renege on peace anytime you want. At the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper. Okay, so if I'm an extremist and an unreasonable person for rejecting the two-state solution, explain to me why you're a reasonable person and a pro-peace person for constantly endorsing it and sticking to it, no matter how many times it's been shown to fail. I'll take us back in history a little bit. I'll start in 1967. 50 years doesn't sound like a lot, but a lot can happen in 50 years, especially in this part of the world. Okay, so we get, I'll use the term that's accepted in modern vernacular so everybody's on the same page. We take over the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. The West Bank had been illegally occupied by Jordan, Gaza by Egypt. The Sinai is part of Egypt, legally. The Golan Heights is part of Syria, legally. Or was. The formula that was pursued at that time, not only with the Arab states that we defeated, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, but with the nascent Palestinian national movement, which was just budding in the late 1960s, is that we will give you sovereignty, we'll give you your land back in the case of Egypt, possibly Jordan, Syria, in exchange for recognition and peace. And we also approached the Palestinians at that time and we asked them, hey, do you want to be sovereign? Do you want to have some kind of country of your own or whatever? And they said no. I mean, the Arab League met in Khartoum of that year, which is in Sudan, and said the famous three no's: no recognition of Israel, no negotiations with Israel, no peace with Israel. Lovely. Fair enough. And so it's peaceful. It's relatively peaceful and quiet, at least compared to today. So I'm kind of condensing a lot of things here. In 1987, there is a popular uprising against Israeli rule on the part of the Palestinians. It's very kind of a grassroots, organic thing. You have to remember at this time the PLO, the Palestinian leadership, is in Tunis, in Tunisia. It's not local. It's bad. It's really bad. At the end of the whole thing, I want to say 200 Israelis are dead and I think 1,400 Palestinians. It's a very lopsided number. You have to understand, too, that about a third of those Palestinians were killed by other Palestinians, and thanks to warring factions vying for power. This ended in the early 90s with the Oslo process, the Oslo Accords. Basically, representatives of Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization met in Oslo, Norway, and they signed basically a roadmap to peace. It was supposed to be a 5-year deal where Israel would withdraw from certain territories and allow an entity called the Palestinian National Authority to be created and to exercise sovereignty in those territories. We armed them. We gave them a police force, a very well-funded, Western-trained police force that trained primarily by Americans and Europeans. So that would be one of our obligations to them, as we hand over certain territories. We allow them to establish sovereignty, have their own government, their own police force. And to their end, they're supposed to take trust-building measures. They're supposed to officially recognize us, say we have a right to exist. I'm supposed to educate their population towards peace. Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat sign it on the White House lawn. Very, very dramatic. People thought it was history making. In a way, it was, but not positively, not in any particularly redeemable sense. Within days of this deal being signed, the terrorism picks up. This was seen, and by the way, at the start of the Oslo process, approximately 70% of Palestinians and approximately 70% of Israelis wanted it. They wanted this deal. What had filled the void in Palestinian society before the PLO was allowed to establish itself as a government in the form of the Palestinian Authority was an organization called Hamas, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with by now. Hamas is basically the Palestinian branch of what's called the Ikhwan al-Islamiyya, which is the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, which is the group that also spawned Al-Qaeda and other various extremist groups. But in the mid-90s, Hamas begins something that's kind of new. It's something a new dynamic to the fighting of the conflict, and that's suicide bombing. Cafes, buses, discos, people waiting in line at the bank, weddings. Weddings were a particularly popular target. for someone to walk in with a suicide vest and clack themselves off. And what this did is this eroded any trust that we had in the process. And amazingly, in the middle of all this, and this deterioration in which we kept most of our end of the agreement of the Oslo Accords, and they kept literally none of theirs, we were still so peace hungry that we still wanted to talk with them, that we still wanted this deal to go through, even though people were dying in the streets. We were still, and the Palestinian security services that we helped establish were instrumental in a lot of these terrorist attacks. I mean, we gave them guns, and they turned them on us almost immediately. And okay, so towards the end of the 90s, we get Prime Minister Ehud Barak. You have the Palestinian president Yasser Arafat, and they're invited to Camp David in the United States by Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton. Okay, let's hammer out these issues. Let's get the ball rolling again. Let's get back on track for a peace agreement. Fair enough. They both fly to Camp David. I want to say they were there for about 2 weeks. Ehud Barak really almost gave away the farm. He offered the Palestinians, in spite of all this terror and the fact that they've already reneged on the Oslo Accords by this point. This is in 1999, 2000-ish, 2000 really. At Camp David, Ehud Barak offers Yasser Arafat 95% of the West Bank, with additional land swaps to make up for the 5%. He offers him 130% of Gaza. Yes, you heard that correctly. They'd get all of Gaza plus some additional land. People often leave out that little detail. He would get half of Jerusalem, including most of the Old City. There would be an economic aid package. And boom, Palestinian state. Yasser Arafat said 3 things. No, no, and no. President Bill Clinton has categorized this, and he has said multiple times that he tried like hell to get Palestinians a state at Camp David in 2000. But Yasser Arafat said no, 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 and no. In fact, there's a famous quote. I'm not sure what the source is, but Yasser Arafat, in parting Camp David, told Bill Clinton, "You're a great man," to which Bill Clinton replied, "The hell I am. I'm a tremendous failure, and you've made me one." So that was kind of his feelings. Dennis Ross was a negotiator, was president, has also categorized it that way. One of the other participants who was supposed to be a co-signatory of any deal was Prince Bandar, who was Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States at one point. Now, this is hardly a pro-Israel. Saudi Arabia in the 1990s was directly funding terrorism against Israel, and Prince Bandar said that, it basically told Yasser Arafat, if you walk away from this deal, you'll be committing a tremendous crime against the Palestinian people. And he did anyway. Within months, we have the outbreak of the Second Intifada, which is the second Palestinian uprising against Israel. This was not a spontaneous, organic thing. This was directly egged on and orchestrated by Yasser Arafat and Fatah, and it was also joined by the PFLP and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, Hamas, PIJ, things like that. It lasted about 5 years, lasted about 2005. It's about when it really started to calm down. We killed about 3,000 of them, and they killed about 1,000 of us. The reality is, you can't go up against us and win militarily. You will kill some of us. You will force us to defend ourselves. And the result's going to be very devastating for you. We have a very powerful army, which I am not apologizing for. What's very interesting in this time period is that most of the Israelis killed are civilians, about 2/3 of them. They didn't really target soldiers very often. The overwhelming majority of Palestinians that are killed are military-age males. It kind of tells you something. But Anyway, in the meantime, Yasser Arafat dies. He dies in 2004. Good riddance. And there's a new Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas is kind of considered a moderate, and I'm not sure why. He's a Holocaust-denying terrorist, former unrepentant terrorist. He's no more willing to make peace than his predecessor was. In 2005, unilaterally, we decide to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Ariel Sharon, the prime minister, says, okay, we're not going to have one Israeli soldier. We're not going to have one Israeli living in the Strip. We're going to withdraw without any agreements and see what that brings us, see if that buys us a little bit of goodwill. And he does. It almost caused a civil war in the country. It was extremely controversial. It still is. I mean, there's still reverberations from this in Israeli society today. Basically, where you had the Israeli army forcing Jews out of their homes forcefully. And it didn't help. It did not bring us peace. It whet their appetite. It basically showed them that we're weak, and when the going gets tough, we leave. And the price for that has been continued warfare ever since from that part of the region. In 2006, Hamas was elected. In 2007, they seized power from Fatah. And they stepped up rocket activity. They rocket more. There was daily for years. They would shell a little town called Sderot, and other small villages and towns in the area. It was really bad. So, and we fought 3 wars there: 2008, 2012, and 2014. The last of which I participated in. I fought in. All of those wars were aimed at putting a stop to Palestinian terror. It was about targeting the infrastructure of the terror organizations, namely their rocket launching capability, and collapsing their tunnels, the tunnels that they dig into Israel that they plan to use for future attacks. In each, I mean, if I total these 3 wars together, again, about 3,000 of them have died, and about 250 of us have died. It's very lopsided. And again, I don't apologize for that. We invest in protecting our people. We have the Iron Dome that shoots down rockets. And unfortunately, and by all means, don't take my word for it, you can look this up, the terror organizations in the Gaza Strip store and use their rockets and their military arsenal purposefully in and around civilian targets. It's true that you cannot target a hospital that's acting as a hospital. But when a group of militants take over a hospital and they begin using it as a rocket launching pad, it loses its immunity, and legally it does become a military target. This is a horrible situation. I'm not saying this is a good thing, but it forces us continuously to make the choice of, do we let them fire at us from a hospital and run the risk of some of our innocent people being killed, or do we respond and run that almost certain risk of some of their innocent people being killed? It's a huge moral dilemma. We make it all the time. I'm not comfortable with this. No one should be comfortable with this. It's disgusting. But I would also contend that it's not our fault. Anyway, back to Land for Peace. We signed a deal with Egypt in 1978 or 79. Can't remember exactly. Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Anwar al-Sadat was the the president of Egypt, and Jimmy Carter signed the Camp David Accords, and basically that we gave Egypt back the Sinai Peninsula in exchange for them recognizing us and ending their official state of belligerency with us. Remember, we fought 5 wars against these people: 1948, 1956, 1967. You had the War of Attrition, which lasted until 1968 and 1972. And then you had the Yom Kippur War in 1973. So we fought Egypt a lot. But we made peace with them, and we gave them back the Sinai Peninsula in a phased manner, chunks at a time. And that was a big loss. The Sinai Peninsula was very rich in oil wealth. We were energy independent for the decade or so that we had it. It was a huge buffer zone between us and Egypt proper. So it had very, very, very obvious security implications. We gave it up. We made peace with Egypt. Cool. And by and large, I'm very satisfied with our peace with Egypt. I'm glad we're not fighting one of the largest armies in the Middle East anymore. I think it's been good for Egypt, too. Because let's face it, it's the same situation. 1948, 1956, 67, 73. There were exponentially more Egyptian soldiers killed than there were Israeli ones. They can't compete on the battlefield with us. So it's an exercise in self-destruction to constantly try to wage war against us. Golda Meir said it best, there's going to be peace when they love their children more than they hate us. She was right. And she also said that, one day we could forgive them for killing us, but we'll never be able to forgive them for forcing us to kill them. So we gave Egypt back the Sinai Peninsula. 1982, there was a war in Lebanon, the PLO. I'm not going to get into the background of that, but we occupied South Lebanon for 18 years to create a buffer zone between terrorists and our northern border because they were constantly attacking us. We withdrew in 2000. And that brought about the second Lebanon war in 2006 with Hezbollah, which was horrible. And again, many more of them than us died. And again, they were the aggressor. It was not us. And they can't even claim that we're occupying anything of theirs. Not since 2000. But yet 6 years later, they came across the border, ambushed one of our border patrols, kidnapped 2 soldiers, and started firing rockets at our cities. So what were we supposed to do? So as part of the Oslo Accords, we gave away parts of Gaza, and later we gave away all of Gaza. We gave away phased portions of the West Bank. During the same time frame, we were trying to give the Golan Heights back to Bashar al-Assad, the butcher who's in Syria right now, the guy that gasses his own people. We were trying to get Syria to recognize us in exchange for giving back the Golan Heights. Thank God we weren't that stupid. That's one of the main things separating us not only from Syria, but from groups like Jabhat al-Nusra and Daesh, ISIS. Even though we have good relations with Egypt now, the Sinai Peninsula is kind of like the wild, wild west since we left. It's a training camp for ISIS. They have attacked us from that territory. They also attacked the Egyptian security forces there, so it's not just us, but my point is that every territory that we leave is not seen as a gesture for peace. It's seen as a weakness to be exploited. And Lebanon, I don't really consider to be a threat. The Lebanese army is kind of a joke. But we have Hezbollah there, and we have groups like Hamas that are very radical. And the people that we're negotiating with, we sat down again with these people in 2008. In 2008, after all this warfare, we sat down again. Ehud Olmert, Mahfouz sat down at Annapolis, Maryland, and he offered even a sweeter deal. He gave Abbas an even sweeter deal than Arafat got. You'll get all of this, all of this, all of this in exchange for peace. All we want is peace. We'll give you all of this stuff. He said, no, no, no. Well, let me think about it. And we never heard from the guy again, basically. Why on earth do you think that giving them a state will bring peace, when giving them land has not brought peace? Polls have shown consistently that the preferred outcome for most Palestinians is the end of Israel as the Jewish state. And contrary to what many people, especially on the left, say, They do not want the creation of a binational state, a binational democracy. That's a pipe dream. What they want is an Arab Islamic state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This has been borne out in polls. They say this themselves. I'm going to read to you a little bit from an article that was published in 2009 by Itamar Marcus and Nan-Jacques Zilberdick. And it's basically about the real state of mind of our quote-unquote peace partners. Pardon me. English, believe it or not, is not my first language, but anyway, and I quote, "On August 4th through 5th, 2009, the Fatah movement will convene its 6th General Conference, the first such gathering in 20 years and the first since the 1993 signing of the Oslo Accords. This official gathering offers a historic and unique opportunity for Fatah and for Mahmoud Abbas, chairman of both Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, to officially and publicly eradicate 4 Fatah principles that are basic foundations of the conflict. This would demonstrate to the world and to Palestinians that the Palestinians have joined the peace process. 1. Fatah does not recognize Israel's right to exist. Fatah leaders emphasize that this ideology is current and not merely an oversight. Mahmoud Abbas, it is not required of Hamas or of Fatah or the Popular Front to recognize Israel. That's from Al Arabiya TV in Dubai and PATV on October 3rd, 2006. Mohammed Dahlan, senior Fatah MP, I want to say for the 1,000th time, in my own name and in the name of all my fellow members of the Fatah movement, we do not demand that the Hamas movement recognize Israel. On the contrary, we demand of the Hamas movement not to recognize Israel, because the Fatah movement does not recognize Israel even today. And that's on PATV, March 16th, 2009. And bear in mind, this is a year after they were offered their own state, yet again. Number 2, Fatah continues to use maps that don't acknowledge Israel's existence. President Barack Obama has condemned such maps as a threat to Israel's security. I will never compromise when it comes to Israel's security, not when there are terrorist groups and political leaders committed to Israel's destruction. Not when there are maps across the Middle East that don't even acknowledge Israel's existence. And that's a quote from the AIPAC conference of June 4th, 2008. Such a map also appears as an official Fatah symbol under guns and under the PLO flag. When this symbol was created, it had only one meaning, that Fatah would destroy Israel through violence. Number 3, the Fatah Charter still calls for Israel's destruction. Article 8, the Israeli existence in Palestine is a Zionist invasion with a colonial expansive base, and it is a natural ally to colonialism and international imperialism. Article 19, armed struggle is a strategy and not a tactic, and the Palestinian Arab people's armed revolution is a decisive factor in the liberation fight and in uprooting the Zionist existence. And this struggle will not cease unless the Zionist state is demolished and Palestine is completely liberated. Number 4, Fatah continues to endorse violence and terror. Mahmoud Abbas, now we are against armed conflict because we are unable. In the future stages, things may be different. I was honored to be the one to shoot the first bullets in 1965. He's referring to the first Fatah terror attacks against Israel in 1965. And having taught resistance to many in this area and around the world, defining it and when it is beneficial and when it is not, we had the honor of leading the resistance. We taught everyone what resistance is, including the Hezbollah, who were trained in our camps, i.e. PLO camps, in the 1960s and 70s. It's a quote from Al Dastur, which is a Jordanian thing, February 28th, 2008. There's a quote from Mohammed Dahlan. This is our right, a legal right. The international community affirms it for us, but it is the responsibility of the leadership to use it when it wants. in the proper place and in the proper time. We cannot leave it in the hands of youth who use their own judgment. This is the difference between the Palestinian Authority using this right and just anyone using it. I lived with Chairman Yasser Arafat for years. Arafat would condemn terror operations by day, while at night he would do honorable things. In other words, at night he would fight us. He would launch terror attacks against us, but on the day and daytime, in front of an English-speaking audience, he would condemn terror. I don't want to say any more about this, and that's Mohammed Dahlan, PATV, Fatah, July 22nd, 2009. That's the end of the quote from the article from Itamar Marcus and Nanjak Silberdick. Things have only gotten worse since then. Really, they've only gotten worse. To this day, in 2018, Mahmoud Abbas still praises Palestinian stabbers, car rammers, bombers, shooters. He still adheres to what's called the Trojan horse strategy, which is where Fatah, which is the governing Palestinian movement, will, for the sake of keeping up appearances, occasionally engage in negotiations with Israel as part of what they call their staged program. We'll negotiate with you and we'll get what we can for now, but at a later date we'll use the territories we acquire to continue to wage war on you until we get all of the land, until you're gone. That's really what they want. Again, I challenge you. Don't ask me. Don't believe a thing I say. Go look it up. You can look at translated clips of them talking about this stuff. Openly. You can even see contrasted clips of Yasser Arafat in the 1990s saying, oh, we want peace, we're glad to have peace. And at the same day, in English, he's saying we want peace, we're happy to sign the Oslo Accords, whatever. The same day, he's meeting in front of a crowd in Gaza City saying jihad, 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 jihad. We have to continue the struggle against the Zionists. They're very two-faced. And no, I don't mean all Palestinians. Obviously, not all of a group of people can be two-faced. Their leadership certainly is. There's no denying that at this point. Without asking anything of them in return, we gave them the Gaza Strip, and we gave them the major cities in the West Bank and other parts of territories from which they have used to attack us. And of course, when they attack us, we always fight back. We have to. In 2002, there was a Palestinian suicide bomber who blew himself up during the middle of a Passover Seder. He killed 29 innocent people. It was determined that a lot of these suicide bombers were coming from Jenin, which is an Arab city in the West Bank. So we sent in the army, we cordoned it off, and we went into the part of the city to basically clear out the terror infrastructure. It was a battle. It was a pretty fierce battle for a couple days. The Battle of Jenin. We lost 23 soldiers. They lost 52 people. They claimed it was a massacre. That was the big, the atrocity propaganda. Oh, the Israelis massacred, killed hundreds of people in Jenin. We killed 52 people, all but 12 of which were armed gunmen. And many of the ones that were not armed gunmen were mostly young boys that were killed by booby traps that were set by groups like the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas. I know one 12-year-old boy was killed when a wall collapsed thanks to one of the mines that they laid. So anytime they attack us, we're going to respond. We can't not respond. The only language that a lot of these people understand is violence. That's unfortunate. I don't want it to be this way. I could give you 1,000 reasons why I personally don't like the two-state solution in its current iteration. I could go into the religious arguments, the land, it's not our land to give away, God gave us this. That doesn't interest you. I could probably give you the legal arguments In fact, I know I can, as to why we should not give away any more of this land. There is a legal basis for saying that we should retain all of it. That's not going to interest many people. People are interested in solutions and why solutions should not be sought or why they should be sought. I don't want a two-state solution because I know how that story ends. If a Palestinian state were to be created tomorrow, and they get half of Jerusalem, the West Bank, some type of land bridge between the West Bank and Gaza, woohoo! They have their own state. I know that there's no peace there because their own small state is not what they want. They want us gone, and they want all the land. There's no compromise there. I can't compromise with that. I can't compromise with them killing or ethnically cleansing all of us and rolling over and dying. I can't compromise with that demand. Nor should I have to. They have room to compromise on a national existence. They can compromise and say, okay, we'll take this. We'll be happy with it, and we'll build. Look, with Gaza, they could have built the Singapore of the Middle East for a bit of tech business mecca, so to speak, and we would have helped them do it. We tried to help them do it a couple times. I don't want a two-state solution, not because I'm against peace, but because I'm for peace. If a Palestinian state comes into existence tomorrow, they will arm themselves to the teeth. What has been a ragtag group of militias like Hamas, PIJ, the Fatah groups, the Palestinian Security Forces, will become an army with tanks, possibly even a small air force, and they'll be able to import militants from Lebanon, from Hezbollah, from Iran, other parts of the Middle East, and the world possibly. They will arm themselves to the teeth, and having the confidence of having established their own state and having gotten the cursed Jews to give them something, they'll be emboldened to attack us further. They'll try to eradicate us. And I'm going to say that there's a 99.9999999% chance that they'll fail. They'll fail miserably. Why will they fail miserably? Because we'll defend ourselves. And it won't be like before, because once Palestinians are a country and they have their own army, it changes the game a little bit. The gloves come off a little bit more when you're not fighting a group of stateless people. They'll be devastated. It'll just be like every other uprising and war we've fought with them in the past. There will be 5 of them dead for every one of us. There'll be a lot more of them dead for every one of us. It won't end the conflict. It'll just escalate it to a new level if a Palestinian state is created. That's why I can't support it. Right now, as horrible as it is, this conflict is very low intensity compared to a lot of other conflicts that are still brewing around the world. I'd hate to see that change. I really would. I would hate to see it to a point where West Jerusalem is being shelled from East Jerusalem with howitzer cannons, and we're fighting back. We're bombing them with F-16s. I'd hate to see us have to use tactics like saturation bombing to get rocket attacks to stop. Because once they have the whole of the West Bank, they can fire right down on our only international airport. They can fire right down where 80% of our population lives, where almost 100% of our industry is. It would be like shooting ducks. It'd be so easy for them to target us. And we would respond with all the ferocity imaginable if that were to ever happen. It would not be pretty. I think the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is front page news now. Just wait. Just wait until it's a conflict between one sovereign state and another. It'll be absolutely horrendous. And our options for dealing with it then will be much more limited than they are now. I don't want that. So the question becomes, so what do we do, Gav? What do we do? I would. This is very hard for me to say because I have principles that go against this. I would sign a deal with the Palestinians to establish a state. If I thought there was even one iota of a chance that it would actually bring peace, I would allow it. If I actually thought that their society had reached a point where, okay, we no longer want to fight you, we want to live alongside you and have economic cooperation, yada, 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 coexistence, great. As painful as it is for me to give away any of this land, I would do it. It would be worth it. It would be worth it if I never had another friend that died fighting these wars or killed in a terror attack. It would be worth it if I never had to go to another funeral for a young person taken way before their time. It would be worth it. But that's wishful thinking because that's not the reality we live in. I can't tell you definitively what I think what the real answer is, but I can give kind of a general outline. In order for there to be peace, any kind of peace, whether it's between two nations or a stateless group of people and a nation, they have to change on the societal level. They're changing right now, but for the worse. They're getting much worse thanks to how they're educated and just the constant cradle to grave messaging they get about how we're evil and we need to be wiped out and that dying a shaheed, a martyr, is a good thing. You can kill Jews doing it. So, in order for Palestinian society to be changed, I don't have a whole lot of confidence that that could ever happen from within. I don't think we could ever expect that they'll change themselves, that a new generation will arise and say no more of this, because they're so immersed in this ideology that we have to go. There's no way that change could ever come from within. So what that's going to require of us is one of two things. Well, really, I think two things combined into one. I think at some point, in order to get this change in Palestinian society, we would have to reoccupy all of Gaza and the West Bank. And I don't mean occupy, and I don't think legally that's the correct term, to be honest with you. But whatever. We would have to take control of their media and their educational institutions. It will not be quick. I will probably not see this in my lifetime. And I'm not that old. But basically, it would require taking away some of their agency, some of their autonomy, and basically re-educating them from the ground up. Why do I think that works? Because in Israel, where Arabs and Palestinians are citizens, there are different options for sources of information. If you live in Gaza, everything you get is filtered through Hamas. If you live in the West Bank, everything you get is filtered through Fatah. In Israel, you get to coexist with your Jewish neighbors. You get to see their side of things. You get to go to schools that are way less ideologically driven. And we see in Israel, of course, there are Arab Israelis that identify as Palestinian, and there are some that are just as radical as those across the Green Line. But by and large, most Israeli Arabs are peaceful. They recognize that, whatever problems they have with the state, we're not going anywhere. There's a certain subset of them that are becoming even patriotic and are integrating into the society. I think the only way we can ever have peace is if we control not only the land, but their education and their media. That's the only way. And at some point in the future, 2-3 generations, when they've realized as a collective, sure, there's always going to be certain small groups that are always going to reject us and always fight us. I think that's just the reality we have to deal with. But I think we could get to a point where their society would progress to a point where, okay, now we're ready for genuine peace and coexistence. And at that point, 100 years from now, 150 years from now, we could sign some type of deal with them where they either establish a state or we establish some type of autonomous zone for them, like the Emirates concept of Professor Mordechai Kedar, which I encourage you to look into. I think that's the only viable possible thing to do. I think that is the only thing in the long run where we will ever be able, outside of divine intervention, to have peace with these people. I wouldn't say that if I thought otherwise. And so that's what I advocate. I don't see why my ideas are any more extreme than the people that want to stick to this land for peace formula, this two-state religion almost, when it's the most tried and failed geopolitical solution of the 20th and now the 21st century. It just does not work. It's been said that the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. It's time to try something new. Even if that something new isn't very popular and it will not be easy, it's time to try something new. And I hope I've adequately explained why I reject the current two-state solution. If there's any comments, questions, or anything I can clarify for you, go ahead and leave a comment on the video. Shalom.